What's happening right now in countries like Burma and Cambodia is that you have scammers there who are putting out ads and saying, come work in this call center job, great pay, a great place to live. They have to surrender their passports when they get there, and they're basically imprisoned in these scam compounds and given scripts and told to go defraud Americans all day long. And if you don't like doing that and you try and get away, you get beaten or worse.
I'm Shawnee Delaney. I spent years undercover as a Defense Intelligence Agency case officer.
And I'm Tyler Grey. I served as a U.S. Army Ranger sniper, as well as an assaulter in an elite Tier 1 counterterrorism unit. This is Control Room.
Welcome to Control Room. Today we have someone very, very interesting, John Breyault. He's the vice president with the National Consumers League. Tell me about the mission, what you do, and how you got into it.
Yeah, thanks, Shawnee. Appreciate you having me on the show. So the National Consumers League, we are a 126 years young organization, founded in 1899. And my standard opening joke is that no, I'm not a founding member. But we came out of the progressive era. So we were started by suffragettes who saw working conditions that were awful for workers here in New York City. One of our founders was a witness at the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Oh, that's amazing.
They got involved in child labor, been involved in food safety. So the Food and Drug Act is a product of work that the NCL did. So is the Social Security Act. So for 150 years, we've been trying to make the world better for consumers and for workers. I work on a whole broad portfolio of issues. So everything from fraud that we're going to talk about today to helping airline travelers, trying to get policies so that you get a refund when your plane gets canceled.
They got it so bad. They don't even care anymore.
Yeah, well, that's partly because of public policy. Ford Airlines control 80% of the market because we allowed mergers to happen like unchecked for 30 years. They're not subject to any enforcement by the states. You can't sue an airline.
Really?
Yeah, because the private, you don't really have a private right of action when it comes to airlines. So the buck stops at the Department of Transportation.
And hence you take the train.
And hence I take although the train is also regulated by the federal government as well, at least for interstate Amtrak. But yeah, so I work on airline issues. I work on live event ticketing issues. So fighting Ticketmaster is a big part of my day.
Yeah. Are you friends with Taylor Swift?
I am not friends with Taylor Swift, but what happened to her was the gift that keeps on giving for our work. Because
what happened? Sorry.
So in 2023, she was going to go out on her Eras tour. It was like their biggest tour, and I think she hadn't toured in like 5 or 6 years. And the tickets all went on sale, and the system crashed. Thousands of fans left without the ability to get tickets. And so Swifties being Swifties, outrage ensued. It was a huge story. There were hearings in Congress in January of 2024, and push for reforms that we'd wanted in ticketing. So like the fact that now you're going to start seeing tickets where the price you see, the first price you see, is the one you're going to pay, right? Rather than getting hit with 40% added on at the end in fees, that sort of all-in pricing, that's because of work that we're doing at the National Consumers League to get rules in place in Washington. And with the new things like crypto, like peer-to-peer apps, even going back to old school things like gift cards, we're even hearing of consumers who are handing money in cash, not to the scammers themselves, but to Uber drivers that the scammers are hiring to come and pick up an envelope from your house.
I will say I used to work at Uber. I don't speak on their behalf, but this is a problem they are aware of and they are working with. They have fantastic relationships with law enforcement all over the world.
Yeah. The problem is that the scale that they are operating at, even if they stop 98, 99% of fraud, that 1% can still mean millions of people getting scammed. And in fact, that is actually what's happening every year.
We talk about scammers and fraudsters, but what does that mean? Who is behind this? Is it just cartels? Is it organized criminal groups? Who's pulling the strings?
It's all of the above, right? And different groups tend to specialize in different types of scams. In Mexico, we've heard reports that the cartels are getting into selling bogus timeshares. In Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union have always been hotbeds of cybercrime. In Jamaica, for years, there was this thing called the Jamaican lottery scheme. There were gangs in Kingston who were killing each other to get access to lists of contact information of Americans that they could contact through the phone and email and other ways. Basically, you get an email that says you've won $1 million in this lottery. I just need you to pay $500
for processing,
or whatever. In West Africa, they've known for years as the 429 boys.
Or the Yahoo boys, right?
The Yahoo boys, right, who were involved in similar schemes on the borders of Cambodia and in Burma. You have entire scam compounds that are well known, that are specialized in what's called pig butchering. So pig butchering is a terrible name for a scam that basically involves gaining people's trust through romance schemes or investments or friendship, people that, Americans that they meet on social media, for example, or in Facebook groups.
Dating apps.
Right. And you build this trust, and then the hook comes in. It's like, hey, I've made a lot of money on this crypto investment. I'm just sharing this with you. You want to get involved, and you get directed to a crypto site that looks completely legitimate. You start investing a little money. You might even see some returns. Encourages you to invest more and more, and eventually they disappear with all of your money. What's happening right now in countries like Burma and Cambodia is that you have scammers there who are putting out ads in China and saying, come work in this call center job, great rate, great pay, and you'll be in Burma or Cambodia, which is just a great place to live. You entice people down from China. They have to surrender their passports when they get there, and they're basically imprisoned in these scam compounds and given scripts and told to go defraud Americans all day long on these pig butchering scams. And if you don't like doing that and you try and get away, you get beaten or worse. And so it's one scam leading to human trafficking and the proceeds going to support regimes that none of us, I think, appreciate.
So you're touching on every malicious actor there can be.
Yeah.
Is everyone's goal money, or do they have other goals in doing this?
Well, ultimately, the goal of most scammers is to get money. But where that money goes after the scammers get a hold of it is definitely a place where you see nation states getting involved. We know that North Korean scammers have been involved in cybercrime for many, many years to support that regime. We know that proceeds from some of these scam compounds in Southeast Asia are going into human trafficking. We know that the cartels are using the revenue they get to, hold on to the power in Mexico and to send drugs in the United States. And we've seen scammers getting money and this going to global terrorist organizations. For you and me, this sounds like, grandma got scammed, right? She's out a couple $100. But when you multiply that across the entire spectrum of the US population and globally, we're talking about not just a financial crimes problem, it becomes a national security problem. That's why we need to have an all of government and all of economy commitment to getting rid of this. And I think, bringing it to what we do, what we are calling on right now is we need a national policy to fight fraud, right? You look across the different agencies, the alphabet soup of federal agencies, most of them have people or divisions whose at least part of their job is to fight fraud, but they're not talking to each other, right? And so consequently, you have this fragmented approach to this problem where the numbers keep getting worse, and when I'm a victim of fraud or my parents are a victim of fraud, they don't know who to call.
Like right there, that's a problem that we need to solve.
And it's unique to fraud, by the way. If somebody breaks into my house and steals a bunch, steals my TV,
cops,
right? I call the cops. I put in a report, and then after that, I'm going to get in touch with my insurance company to try and reimburse me for the window that they broke and the TV that they stole. In fraud, it's not really like that because insurance for fraud is not something that most people get.
There's no one-stop shop for people to go when something has happened.
Yeah.
What do you advise people to do? I've just been a victim of a fraud or a scam. What do I do?
Well, the closest thing that we have to that is at the FTC. So the Federal Trade Commission has been around for over 100 years. Their website is ftc.gov, and consumers can file consumer complaints there. They can also file consumer complaints at our website, which is fraud.org, and we'll share that with the FTC and other agency partners.
I'm thinking of, if I was a consumer that had fraud, my gut instinct would be to go to law enforcement.
Yeah.
That seems like the logical, obvious, I had a crime happen to me. Mm-hmm. Someone stole money. That's a better way to say it. Somebody stole money, call the cops.
Right.
And, is that something that that is working.
Well, it is and it isn't. So when you say you call law enforcement, you call the cops. For most people, that's going to mean you're going to call your local police. What we hear from consumers again and again is that when they call their local police, they hear a couple of different responses. Typically, it's either A, we don't handle that. Call the state attorney general, call the Federal Trade Commission. Or if you press it, they'll take your report, but there's not really anything they can do about that because these scammers are often located overseas, right? Your local police department isn't going to be able to go after a scammer in Southeast Asia, for example. Or they'll take your complaint and do nothing with it. We've heard, and this applies even, I think, to all the way up to the federal level. The FBI doesn't even get involved in cases until losses exceed $30,000. And so when the median loss is $497, you can see why even when you're a victim, you might not know where to go. Now, that's not to say that consumers shouldn't report it, right? You may not be able to help solve the problem in your particular case, but what you do by reporting is you help law enforcement build recognized trends. And your complaint plus a bunch of others can come together and help create cases that actually do result in some of these scammers getting put behind bars. But unfortunately, the reality is, and this is the big problem, is that most scammers get away with it. It's a very low-risk crime for them. That's why you see an explosion in the number of fraud cases that are happening right now. It's one where the criminals just aren't going to jail the way they are for drug deals, for example.
But do you think it's also because you say it's low risk? Mm-hmm. Is it also just really easy to get into and really easy to do? And with technology now, it's like supercharged, right? Like you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a good writer.
Sure. Well, I mean, fraud was already a problem before AI, right? With the dawn of AI, the barriers to entry to being a scammer have just dropped dramatically. Before, we used to be able to tell consumers that if you got an email and it looked like it was written by somebody for whom English wasn't their first language, right? That was a red flag.
Yeah.
Well, now it doesn't matter where you are. You just put the script into ChatGPT and say, make this look just like American English, and it'll spit it out, and then you can use it in your phishing emails. So that bit of advice that we've been using for a decade plus is now out the window. And so consequently, a number of potential scammers out there has just exploded. According to the FTC, last year, there were 6.5 million reports of fraud in the US alone. And if you look at the rate at which that's going, you basically have a kind of a steady uptick in fraud complaints for the last 20 years. Then we hit COVID. And COVID was just the hockey stick. So we went from 3.5 million pre-COVID to 6.5 million complaints last year.
Wow.
And that's a $12.5 billion loss that we're talking about. And even that number, as big as it is a dramatic undercount. So the FTC estimates that only about 4% of people who have been victims of fraud report it to the commission. And so if you extrapolate that out, we're talking about a $158 billion a year problem in the United States.
So I have a personal question.
Yeah.
Have you ever been a victim of fraud or fallen victim to a scam?
Yes.
Can you tell us about it?
Actually, this is kind of how I got interested in working on scams to begin with. In college, was it in college? No, it was Bradford College. I did a trip to Jamaica for a friend's wedding. And we had the wedding, and then a bunch of us went down the beach to the local club at the end of the beach. And there was a guy at the bar who I was going to the bar to get a beer, and he's like, hey, you're obviously a tourist, but I can get you a deal. And instead of paying, $5 for a bottle of beer, give me some money and I'll get you some, because I know the bartender. Me being stupid, maybe a little bit drunk.
And poor.
Handed the guy the money, and he promptly laughed and went with his friends who were all like 6'3" and huge, and I'm not going to say anything to them. And it seems weird. I was only out $20, but it really stuck with me because it's like, again, it's the same sort of signals that I should have known. Crowded bar, I want a drink, urgency. Unusual way to pay. I'm handing cash over. Stranger, and isolation. What am I going to do? Go complain to my friends? So that's a very small microcosm. And I think you take that, and if that guy who I gave the $20 to in the Jamaican bar now has access to millions of people through the internet with advanced digital payments technology, you can see how that can snowball.
Did you tell your friends?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
Oh.
They laughed at me. Because unfortunately, them laughing at me is what fraud victims feel again and again today when they are victims. And it's why they don't report it. They're afraid of that nobody's going to believe them. And in fact, the scammers play on that. And they're afraid that if they report it, particularly to loved ones, and this is a particular concern if you're older, that it's going to lead to you losing your financial independence.
Or taking away your phone.
Or taking away your phone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We know that the harm of being a victim of fraud goes beyond just the financial. There are emotional and psychological tolls that it takes. There's a public health issue as well.
Yeah.
So
it's trauma.
It's trauma.
Yeah.
Exactly. And while $497, which is sort of the median loss last year, it sucks. But we hear every day from victims of fraud and their family members who have lost their life savings. These are
and 497 could be someone's life savings.
That's true. 497 could be somebody's life savings.
That could be life savings, yeah.
But routinely we'll get complaints where people have lost in the thousands, in the tens, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the really heartbreaking thing is that particularly when we're talking about older Americans who are particularly vulnerable because they have a lifetime of savings that's attractive to scammers, they don't have time to get that back. Right? So this now puts a burden on family members.
If they have them.
Who, if they have them, have to take care of them. If not, on the social safety net. Has to take care of these people. So this
which is a tax burden.
Which is a tax burden on you and me. So I don't think it's a stretch to say we're all paying for fraud in one sense or another, even if we think we're too smart to be a victim.
You got AI enabling this proliferation of scamming, right? What about AI on the other defensive side? Isn't it a tool that should be able to help us defensively as it's helping them offensively?
Yes, it should, and it is being used that way. It's timely you asked that question. 2 weeks ago, we held a conference on this very topic on the confluence of AI and consumer fraud, and our second panel was called, How the Good Guys Are Using AI. And we had representatives from Google and Amazon and the banking sector who talked about the investments their companies are using in AI. And they're trying to do this precisely because of the problem that you just illustrated, which is the scammers are getting so savvy and so widespread that sort of expecting one guy, the fraud person in your organization, to take care of this is not going to solve the problem.
There is a company called O2. Have you heard of them? So O2 is a company, I think they're based in the UK, but they made a video, it came out. And basically what they did is they've created an AI version of a grandma named Daisy. And they have a really cute video of her doing these different
I think I have heard about this.
I did hear about this.
But what Daisy does is if someone reports a scam number, a phone number, or someone who's called them or texted them, Daisy will tie up that scammer for hours. And they've replicated, so it's not one Daisy, it's a million Daisies.
Yeah.
So if the theory is if Daisy can waste the time of the scammers, they are not spending time on target with the victims or potential victims.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And the ad that they did is really cute too.
Yeah. There are folks out there, there's a whole sort of category of YouTubers who are called scam baiters.
I love those people.
Who do this, yes.
Yeah.
And it's certainly entertaining. But part of me also is saying you're sending the wrong message. Our message to consumers has always been, don't click on links. Don't respond to that phone call.
Don't engage.
Don't engage, because even if you're doing it as a way, as for the lulz, what you're telling that scammer and every other scammer that they're in touch with is that you're somebody who responds. And so all you're likely to do is get more and more calls. Because
they've added you to the list.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And to the technology piece on it, I'm glad that O2 is out there with Daisy, but this is not a problem that I think there's one technological silver bullet to. We really need not only technology, we need consumer education, we need better information sharing, because there's the entire problem with the fraud chain, that everybody in the fraud chain isn't sharing the information that can actually put a stop to this. And then we need leaders in states, leaders in the federal government to get involved, because this, like I said, $158 billion. Think about what $158 billion not going out of the pockets of Americans into the hands of the worst could do for our country.
So what would you say are the top 5 things a consumer can do to try and mitigate their risk?
Well, I would say let's start with the universal signs of fraud. Number one, fraudsters want to create a sense of urgency. They want to create a sense of urgency that something bad is going to happen to you if you don't act right now, or you're going to miss out on something great if you don't act right now. In both cases, they want you to act first and think later. They want you to be thinking with your reptile brain, not with your sort of logical brain.
Urgency is a red flag.
Urgency is a red flag.
Gotcha. Okay.
Number 2 is watch out for any asks for unusual ways to pay, right? So scammers at the end of the day want money, and they want it in a way that is quick, that is anonymous, and that is irreversible. So if you're being asked to pay for something through a peer-to-peer
gift
app,
card,
through a gift card, through crypto, which is becoming a huge problem, in cash, particularly for something that you've never actually met eye to eye in real life, like that's another big red flag. Number 3 is watch out for any sort of signals that they're trying to isolate you. We know that again, this gets back to the urgency. Scammers don't want you talking to other people because other people aren't what they call under the ether, right? The scammers want to get you in a heightened emotional state, so you're acting first and thinking later. If you stop and talk to a friend or a loved one or a coworker, chances are they're going to say, something sounds kind of fishy here, and that'll break the spell.
Urgency helps too because you're more isolated if you are trying to act immediately and you don't have time to go chat with other people.
Exactly. So the other day we heard a story about consumers who were being instructed to stay on the phone with the scammer as they went into the bank to try and take out funds that they could then send to the scammer. The scammer had them on the phone talking them through what they knew the bank was going to say to try and stop them.
Wow.
And answering the questions that the scammer knew they needed to answer to get the money. And again, that's to keep you only talking to the scammer and isolate you from anybody who might try and dissuade you.
That's control.
Yeah.
That's what they're controlling.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, and 3. And then number 4 and 5, I would say basic digital hygiene. Number 1, make sure and update all of your browser and your operating system. Turn on your password, use a password manager if you're not using that right now already. And number 5, make sure, particularly for your important accounts like your primary email, your bank accounts, social media, turn on multi-factor authentication. Those are to sort of reduce the risk of scammers getting into your accounts, using a reused password to break into multiple accounts and then send messages to everybody else in your network.
So do you feel like we're currently in the dark ages with these scams and fraud, and things are going to get better, or are the dark ages ahead of us, in your opinion?
Well, I wish I was more optimistic about this, but I do unfortunately think that things are going to have to get worse before they start to get better. The scammers continue to advance with more tools, able to reach more people. AI is going to just supercharge fraud. But I do think that somewhat counterintuitively, as the fraud numbers go up, they get harder to ignore. And so some of the solutions that we've been pushing for years in Washington and internationally are starting to take root. So in places like the UK and Australia, they now have national policies that are designed to help fraud victims and to prevent fraud. We want to see that here in the United States, but unfortunately, I think we're going to see a lot more victims before we start having the political will to fight this. And I think one way that we can start to build that political will very personally is for all of us to start having conversations with each other. So the next time that you're with your family at a family gathering or a cookout or a holiday, I think it's important that we talk about sort of our own experiences with fraud and scams, because not all of us can talk about the Electronic Funds Transfer Act or the Federal Trade Commission or which committee is having a hearing on this today, but we all have our own stories about what happened. And when we talk about that, we reduce the stigma and we help make it so that people report more and so that our leaders in Congress can't ignore us.
I think that's brilliant, and you're normalizing it. And all of us get these, text messages and emails every day. So sharing, I got this one. Oh shoot, I got that one too. I didn't know that was a scam. I think you're absolutely right.
And we make it a safe space to have conversations because it's, all of us can talk about sort of the toll road, the toll road text message we got the other day. But it's really hard, particularly if you've been a victim, to be vulnerable and say, I lost money to this. And I think for victims who have lost a lot of money, who it's a big financial hit, they often don't want to talk about it at all. It's traumatic. They don't want to relive that. And unfortunately, the scammers thrive on that because we're not talking about it. Then the next time the scammers come, they know that the person they're defrauding isn't going to tell anybody, which is perfect for the scammers.
And that's why we're glad you're here to talk about stuff like this. And before we let you go, we'd like to play a little game with our guests. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some speed round questions, all right? What is your go-to fake name when you buy a coffee?
Luigi.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. What was the first screen name you ever had?
Ron John. Like the surf shop?
Oh, yeah. Oh, cool. Okay. The social platform that's the most dangerous for people now?
Probably Meta.
Okay. What's one cyber habit that you would never skip?
Not using a password manager.
Maybe this might answer the next one. If every American did just one thing to protect themselves online, what would it be?
Talk to your family and friends about fraud.
Good one.
John, thanks so much for being here. Where can people find you?
Well, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate the service that y'all are doing, getting this message out to folks. Folks who want to learn more about this can visit our website, www.fraud.org. They can also visit the National Consumers League's website at www.nclnet.org.
And where can they find you?
I'm on the socials. I'm on Twitter at @JammingEcono. That's probably the best way for people to reach me.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing for everybody.
Of course.
Be sure to like and subscribe and leave comments. We would love to hear from you.
New episodes coming every week on LifeLock's YouTube channel.